Why did the city feel like it was holding its breath? The sky over Mosul glowed orange, not with sunrise but with fire. Oil fields burned on purpose. Retreating fighters had set them ablaze like a final insult, a scorched earth goodbye. The smoke climbed into the night and pressed down on everything, thick enough to taste, heavy enough to make breathing feel like a conscious choice. Burning rubber, diesel, and beneath it all something metallic and wrong, the smell that never leaves once you recognize it. 5 stories above the broken street, she lay unmoving. Maeve Torrance had been there for 11 hours, same rooftop, same rifle, same window across the shattered skyline. Her body had stopped complaining hours ago. Pain had faded into numbness. Now there was only stillness, the kind learned, not natural, the kind that came from repetition and consequence. The Barrett M82 rested against her shoulder like it belonged there. 29 pounds of steel and precision, but in her hands it felt familiar, almost weightless. She knew every scratch on it, every place where sweat and skin had worn the metal smooth. They had been together through places most people never saw on a map. The rifle trusted her. She trusted it. Through the scope, the world narrowed into a green-tinted circle. Night vision stripped away color, turned buildings into skeletons. Thermal imaging painted heat in soft oranges and yellows, living things glowing against cold concrete. She wasn't looking at a city anymore. She was looking at a decision. The man in that building had a name, but most Marines just called him the engineer. He built bombs, not crude ones, effective ones. Vehicles packed with artillery shells, fertilizer, shrapnel driven into gates, markets, checkpoints. His bombs didn't misfire. They didn't fail. They killed Marines. They killed civilians. They erased futures with math and precision. 17 Americans confirmed. God knew how many Iraqis. Tonight, intelligence said he was there. Second floor, southwest corner, waiting, planning, teaching someone else how to turn a truck into a coffin. Maeve had watched the window for over half an hour before her spotter spoke. Movement, second floor, southwest window. She already knew. Her breathing slowed. Her pulse dropped. She found that quiet place, the one between heartbeats, where the body became steady and the mind stopped arguing. The shadow stepped into view. Male, tall, beard, shoulders matching the photos burned into her memory. He stood in profile, lit dimly from behind. A candle, maybe, or a small lamp. He looked like a man checking the weather. Her finger found the trigger. 4 pounds 2 ounces. She knew the break by feel alone. Then the world tilted. Another shape entered the frame, smaller, moving differently. The thermal image showed less mass, lower heat. A woman. Holding a baby. For a second, Maeve forgot how to breathe. The infant glowed softly against the woman's chest. The woman rocked gently, speaking. The engineer turned toward them, said something back. He reached out and touched the baby's head. Tenderly. It looked normal. Domestic. A family moment framed inside a war zone, like the world outside didn't exist. Her finger stayed on the trigger. The shot was still possible. The math ran itself in her head. Distance, glass, penetration. The .50 caliber round would pass through him and keep going. The woman and child were just outside the immediate kill zone. Probably safe. Probably. Her radio crackled. Do you have the shot? She swallowed. Target acquired, she said. But there's a civilian, female with an infant. Silence. The kind that stretches. The engineer leaned down, kissed the baby's head. Stand by for guidance. The words landed heavy. Stand by while the opportunity bleeds away. Stand by while a monster steps back into the shadows. He moved away from the window. The woman followed. Darkness swallowed them both. Minutes passed. Then the order came. Weapons hold. Something cold settled in her chest. Not anger, not fear. Helplessness. By sunrise, the building was empty. The engineer was gone. 72 hours later, a white Toyota Hilux drove into the front gate of Fob Mackenzie during shift change. The explosion peeled concrete like foil. 11 Marines died instantly. 23 civilians died with them. When investigators pieced it together, they found his workshop, his tools, his diagrams, and a photo. The engineer smiling beside the truck. When they told Maeve, she didn't cry. She just stared at the wall for 6 hours. That night she tried to resign. Command denied it. She went back to work because that's what Marines do. But something inside her never stood back up. 5 years later, her hands still shook. Why did coming back feel harder than leaving? Fort Liberty looked nothing like Mosul. Pine trees, cold air, quiet roads. But the moment Maeve passed through the gate, her body tightened anyway, as if the past recognized the place even if it didn't belong there. She drove an old Honda Civic with a rattling engine and a broken AC. It ran. That was enough. Her jacket was worn soft at the elbows. Her boots were scuffed. Her hair pulled back for function, not appearance. She looked like someone who'd survived things. The young gate guard studied her ID too long. Captain Torrance, retired. Mosul makes you old fast, she said. He didn't ask anything else. Range 37 stretched out ahead, long and flat, precision targets set at distances most people never tried. This wasn't about noise or speed. This was about patience, control, truth. All men, 50 or 60 of them, experienced, confident. She felt the eyes on her as she walked past. Let them look. She unpacked her rifle at Station 7, ignored the pristine range weapon beside it. Her rifle had history, weight, memory. Ma'am. Authority behind her. She didn't turn. This firing line is for competitors only. I'm on the roster. What's your MOS? 317. The number landed differently than the word. Scout sniper. Skepticism hardened into something sharper. Are you sure you can handle this platform? She finished mounting the scope and stood. I've fired this rifle 347 times in combat, she said calmly. Would you like documentation, or should I just show you? The range went quiet. When the lieutenant tried to question her mental health records, something shifted. Before she could respond, an older Marine stepped forward, his eyes locked on the small silver pin at her collar. A hog's tooth. His face drained of color. That's not decoration, he said quietly. That's history. When the general arrived, the air changed entirely. 2 stars, hard eyes, measured steps. He saw the pin and saluted. Phantom, he said, voice carrying, it's an honor. Her hand came up automatically, steady for once. She saved my life, the general told the crowd. The lieutenant shrank under the weight of it. A demonstration was scheduled for dawn. Maeve nodded, even though her hands were already shaking. What happens when the thing that defined you starts slipping away? The motel room smelled like old smoke and cleaner. The rifle case leaned against the wall like a silent witness. Her medication bottles rattled softly when she touched them. She'd already taken too much. The nightmare came fast. Mosul, the window, the engineer. But in the dream, the faces changed. Marines she knew, Marines she'd lost. Don't shoot, they said. Then the truck hit the gate. The explosion erased everything. She woke gasping, heart racing, hands shaking violently. When the knock came, she almost reached for a weapon that wasn't there. Garrett stood outside with coffee. The engineer, he asked. She nodded. I can't do tomorrow, she said. He didn't argue. He listened. Then he told her about the shot he took. And the kid he killed by accident. We all carry our shots, he said. The ones we take, and the ones we don't. At 2 a.m., he told her to get dressed. We're going to teach you how to shoot with broken hands. Why fight the tremor when you can learn its rhythm? The range was silent under the stars. Garrett watched her through the scope. Your tremor isn't random, he said. It has a cycle. She breathed, watched the crosshairs dance. Then she saw it. A pause. A moment between breaths. Don't fight it, he said. Time it. They practiced for hours, missed the moment, found it, lost it again. Until finally. There. The trigger broke at the exact instant. The world went still. Just for a heartbeat. That's enough, Garrett said softly. An instant is all you've ever needed. Why does proving yourself again hurt more than doing it the first time? Dawn came cold and clear. The range filled with people, cameras, expectations. Maeve lay prone, her hands shook. She breathed. Found the gap. Fired. The shot rang out like truth. Hit. Again. And again. Each round timed not against stillness, but against acceptance. When it was over, no one spoke for a long moment. Then the general nodded. That was enough. Sometimes redemption isn't loud. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand applause. Sometimes it's just a woman breathing through shaking hands and choosing to act anyway. Because dignity doesn't always speak. Sometimes it simply acts. Why did the silence after Mosul feel heavier than the firefights ever had? When Maeve Torrance stepped off the transport plane and onto American concrete, no one clapped. No band played. No one asked what she had carried home with her. The war ended quietly, the way it always did for the people who survived it. A handshake, a signature, a plane ticket. Then the expectation that life would simply resume. But silence has weight. She felt it pressing on her chest as she drove away from the base for the last time, duffel bag in the back seat, rifle shipped separately like a dangerous memory no one wanted too close. The radio played something cheerful. She turned it off. Music felt wrong. Noise felt wrong. Everything felt too clean. At first, she told herself she was fine. She slept mostly. She ate when she remembered. She ran every morning until her legs burned because pain that made sense was easier to manage than pain that didn't. She told the VA doctor what she thought she was supposed to say. Nightmares, yes. Anxiety, manageable. No, she wasn't a danger to herself. No, she didn't hear voices. No, she didn't regret her service. All technically true. What she didn't say was how her hands sometimes shook when she tried to button her shirt. How the tremor came without warning, like her body was remembering something her mind wanted buried. How she avoided holding glass cups because she dropped one once and watched it shatter, heart racing as if it were an explosion. She didn't say that Mosul followed her everywhere. The engineer's window appeared in reflections, in dark TV screens, in the glass of office buildings downtown. Sometimes she saw a woman holding a child in the corner of her vision and had to stop walking until the image faded. She told herself it would pass. Weeks became months. The shaking got worse. When the medical board called her back in, the room smelled like disinfectant and paperwork. The doctor didn't look at her when he spoke. He talked to the chart, to the diagnosis. Service-connected neurological tremor, likely permanent. Permanent was a word that landed like a verdict. They offered medication, therapy, a medical discharge. She signed where they told her to sign. Walking out of that office felt stranger than any patrol she'd ever walked. There were no enemies, no orders, just an open door and no map for what came next. Civilian life didn't ask her who she used to be. It asked who she was now. She worked security contracts at first, night shifts, quiet buildings, places where vigilance still made sense, but the shaking made employers nervous. Her background scared them. The word sniper carried weight they didn't want. "You're impressive," they'd say carefully, "but maybe overqualified." Overqualified felt like another way of saying inconvenient. She moved apartments twice in 1 year, never staying long enough to unpack fully. Sleep came in fragments. Dreams stitched together old rooftops and new streets until she woke unsure of where she was. The rifle stayed in its case. She told herself she didn't need it. But some nights, she sat on the floor with her back against the wall and rested her hand on the closed latches, just to remind herself that something in her life had once made sense. Then the email came. Department of Defense, contractor consultation, annual marksmanship evaluation. She stared at it for a long time before opening it again, read it twice, then a third time. They wanted her expertise. They wanted her voice. They wanted the version of her that existed before the shaking hands and the quiet guilt. She almost deleted it. Instead, she closed her laptop and went for a run until her lungs burned. 2 weeks later, she packed her rifle and drove to Fort Liberty. Standing on Range 37, feeling eyes follow her, Maeve recognized the familiar ache of being underestimated. It wasn't new. It had followed her through training, through deployments, through rooms where men assumed competence came with a deeper voice and broader shoulders. She learned long ago not to correct them. Let results do the talking. But this was different. This time, the doubt wasn't just theirs. It lived in her hands. When the range safety officer questioned her, she felt something old tighten inside her, not anger, but weariness. The exhaustion of having to justify her existence again. The exhaustion of knowing that no explanation would ever be enough. When the sergeant major recognized the hog's tooth, she felt a flicker of something dangerous. Relief. The general's salute hit harder than she expected, not because of the honor but because of what it reminded her of, that once she had been trusted without question. Once her hands had been steady. Once people hadn't needed proof. Now they wanted a demonstration. She agreed because refusal would have felt like surrender. But as she drove away, her reflection in the rearview mirror looked smaller than she remembered. That night alone in the motel room, she laid out her medication like a ritual, lined up the bottles, counted pills, calculated risk. Everything in her life had become calculation. She sat on the edge of the bed and flexed her fingers, watching them tremble. "I can't do this," she whispered to no one. Sleep came anyway. The nightmare didn't change. It never did. It replayed the moment she didn't fire, rewrote it until she was always wrong, until no version of the choice ended cleanly. When she woke, sweating and shaking, she felt hollowed out. Garrett's knock grounded her. He didn't lecture, didn't minimize, didn't tell her to be grateful. He listened. And then he told her a truth she hadn't allowed herself to consider. That sometimes the thing that breaks you isn't the enemy. It's the choice. When he ordered her to get dressed, something inside her resisted. She was tired. She was medicated. She was afraid of failing in a way everyone could see. But another part of her, quieter, older, recognized the tone in his voice. Not command. Faith. On the dark range, with frost biting at her fingers, she felt ridiculous at first. Two broken veterans chasing a solution at 2 in the morning. But as Garrett spoke, as he watched her with the patience of someone who had never given up on her, she felt something shift. He didn't ask her to be who she was. He asked her to be who she was now. When he told her the tremor had rhythm, she almost laughed. It sounded too simple, too hopeful. But hope had a way of sneaking in through cracks. She breathed. Watched. For the first time, she didn't fight her body. She listened to it. The pause came like a secret. Tiny, brief. Enough. Her finger found the trigger at exactly the right moment, and for that fraction of a second, the world aligned the way it used to. She pulled back, heart pounding. Again and again. Failure still came more often than success, but success existed now. Real, repeatable. Garrett didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply nodded. "See," he said, "you're not broken, you're just different." Different. The word settled gently this time. As dawn approached, Maeve lay on the cold ground and watched the sky lighten. Her hands still shook. The fear was still there. The guilt hadn't gone anywhere. But beneath it all, something steadier had formed. Not confidence. Resolve. She packed up her rifle as the first birds began to call, the sound unfamiliar and strangely comforting. Tomorrow, people would watch her, judge her, decide what her performance meant about women, about trauma, about whether damage could be overcome. She couldn't control that. All she could control was her breath. The timing. The choice to show up. Sometimes survival isn't about proving you're unchanged. Sometimes it's about proving you're still willing to try. And in the quiet before morning, Maeve Torrance made that choice again. Why did the morning feel like a courtroom instead of a firing range? The sun rose slow and pale over Fort Liberty, washing the range in a thin, unforgiving light. It wasn't dramatic, no cinematic glow, just daylight revealing everything exactly as it was. The uneven ground, the scuffed firing lines, the people gathering with coffee cups and folded arms, pretending they were there out of routine and not curiosity. Maeve felt it immediately. Expectation. It pressed against her ribs as she unloaded her gear from the trunk. Every movement felt magnified, like she was performing inside a glass box. She could hear fragments of conversation drifting across the range. Low voices, quick glances, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Is she still good? She kept her eyes forward, focused on process. Muscle memory took over where confidence refused to show up. Bipod, rear bag, scope alignment. She moved deliberately, giving her hands time to settle, even as they trembled faintly under the morning chill. She told herself not to look at the crowd. She failed. They stood in loose clusters, Marines in worn jackets, contractors with clipboards, a few officers pretending indifference. Some faces held curiosity, others skepticism. A few carried something sharper, the discomfort of seeing a reminder that survival didn't always look clean. She recognized that look. She'd seen it in mirrors. The lieutenant from the day before stood near the command tent, posture stiff, jaw set. He avoided her gaze, not out of respect, out of uncertainty. She wasn't a category he knew how to file. Good. Garrett stayed back, close enough to help, far enough to let her stand alone. That mattered more than he knew. The range officer's voice cut through the low murmur, crisp and official. Safety brief. Wind call, distance confirmation. The words flowed around her without friction. She'd heard them 1,000 times, but today they sounded heavier, like each syllable carried consequence. She lay prone. The ground was colder than she expected, seeping through her jacket. It grounded her, reminded her she was here, that this was real. The target stood at 1,200 meters, a steel silhouette, unforgiving and honest. It didn't care who she was or what she'd lost. It only responded to physics and timing. Her scope filled her vision. The tremor came almost immediately. Not violent, not dramatic, just enough to remind her it hadn't gone anywhere. Her crosshairs danced softly around center mass like they always did now, tracing a small, mocking circle. Her breathing shortened. Slow it down. In through the nose, out through the mouth. She waited for the pause Garrett had shown her, the tiny moment between breaths, the place where motion briefly gave way to stillness. It didn't come. Her heart thudded louder. Behind her, someone cleared their throat. She almost laughed. Of course. Pressure had a way of chasing away patience. She broke position, sat back on her heels. The murmuring grew. She didn't look up. She closed her eyes instead. Masul tried to creep in. She shut that door hard. Not now. She thought about the things she could feel. The weight of the rifle, the grit under her gloves, the sound of wind moving across the range, the smell of oil and dust. Present. She lay back down. This time she didn't rush. She let the tremor exist without fighting it, watched its rhythm, counted it, felt the pattern in her wrists, her forearms, her shoulders. There. The pause arrived like a held breath. Her finger tightened. The rifle bucked. The sound cracked across the range, sharp and final. A second passed. Then the steel rang. Clear center. A sound she hadn't realized she'd missed until it echoed back to her. No one spoke. She stayed still, eyes still on the scope, heart pounding hard enough to blur her vision. One hit wasn't enough. She knew that. They always wanted consistency. She cycled the bolt. Settled again. The tremor returned, patient as ever. Her mouth felt dry. Another breath. Another pause. She fired. The impact rang out again, just off-center but solid. A few heads turned now. The murmurs changed tone. She didn't let herself listen. Third shot. The pause came late this time. She almost missed it, almost rushed. She waited half a second longer. The rifle spoke. Hit. She exhaled slowly, feeling something loosen in her chest. She wasn't perfect, but she was present. When the ceasefire was called, she rolled onto her side and stared up at the sky. Clouds drifted lazily overhead, unaware of the quiet shift that had just occurred below them. Garrett approached but didn't say anything yet. Neither did the general. They let the silence do its work. Eventually, footsteps stopped near her. Captain Torrance. She sat up. The general's face was unreadable, not stern, not warm, just honest. "You're different than you were," he said. She nodded. "Yes, sir." A pause. "Not worse," he continued, "just different." Something in her chest tightened. He gestured toward the targets. That kind of control doesn't come from muscle memory alone. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. She knew what he meant. Control like that came from restraint, from understanding consequences, from living with choices long enough that you learn to carry them without flinching. The lieutenant shifted uncomfortably. The general turned to him. "Write your report carefully," he said. "This isn't about raw precision, it's about judgment." Maeve felt something unexpected then. Not pride. Validation. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind that settles instead of flares. As the range began to clear, a few Marines approached her. Some nodded, some asked technical questions, wind, trigger pull, breathing cadence. One young corporal lingered, unsure. "Ma'am," he said finally, "how do you keep going?" The question caught her off guard. She studied his face, so young, so certain the world still made sense. "I don't," she said truthfully, "not all the time." He frowned. "Then how do you show up like this?" She considered the question carefully. "Because not showing up doesn't make it easier," she said. "It just makes it quieter." He nodded slowly, absorbing that. As the crowd dispersed, the range returned to something close to normal. Empty lanes, distant echoes, wind brushing over steel. Maeve packed her rifle slowly, deliberately. Each movement felt earned. The general approached her one last time. "There's a position opening," he said. "Advisory, training. You'd be shaping how the next generation thinks before they pull the trigger." She didn't answer right away. She thought about the engineer's window, the woman, the child, the choices that never really end. "I'll consider it," she said. That night back in the motel room, she sat on the bed with the rifle case open beside her. She didn't touch it, just looked. Her hands still shook. They probably always would. But for the first time since Mosul, the shaking didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a reminder that she was still alive, that she could still choose. And sometimes that was enough to keep going. Why did success feel heavier than failure ever had? Maeve sat alone in the motel parking lot long after the range emptied, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel as they trembled in the open air. The afternoon sun bounced off windshields and concrete, too bright, too normal. People laughed somewhere nearby. A car door slammed. Life continued, careless and loud. She felt detached from it all. The demonstration had gone well, better than she'd allowed herself to hope. She should have felt relief, satisfaction, something resembling victory. Instead, her chest felt tight. Success had a way of reopening doors she'd worked hard to keep shut. The general's offer echoed in her mind. Advisory, training, shaping judgment before the trigger was pulled. It sounded noble, responsible, like a way to make meaning out of the weight she carried. It also sounded like an invitation back into a world she wasn't sure she could survive again. She drove without a destination, letting instinct guide her through familiar roads, past the PX, past rows of housing that looked identical from the outside, each one hiding its own quiet battles. She ended up at the base chapel without planning to. The building sat modest and unassuming, doors open, no service in progress. She almost kept driving. Then she parked. Inside, the air was cool and still. Sunlight filtered through narrow windows, painting thin bands of color across wooden pews. The space felt neutral, not demanding belief, just offering silence. She sat in the back. For a long time, she didn't think about anything at all. Then the memories came anyway. Not the loud ones. The small ones. A Marine's handwriting on a care package letter. The way the desert cooled sharply after midnight. A joke told badly over a radio net, laughed at because laughter was better than fear. And then the one she always avoided. The woman at the window. The child. She closed her eyes, breath catching. The guilt rose the way it always did, slow, relentless, familiar. She'd spent years trying to categorize it. Moral injury, survivor's guilt, command responsibility displaced onto an individual trigger finger. None of the terms fit quite right. It wasn't that she regretted not firing. It was that she would carry the consequences either way. Her phone buzzed softly in her pocket. Garrett. You alive? She almost smiled. Yeah. Proud of you. She stared at the word. Proud. It felt undeserved, like praise for something she hadn't earned. She typed back slowly. Not sure what I proved today. The reply came after a pause. That you can still choose discipline over fear, that counts. She sat with that. Discipline over fear. Not courage. Not heroism. Discipline. When she left the chapel, the sun was lower, shadows longer. She felt marginally steadier, as if acknowledging the weight had redistributed it. That evening she spread the offer letter across the motel desk. The language was careful, respectful, no promises of glory, just responsibility, just work. She imagined standing in front of young Marines, explaining not how to shoot, but when not to, how to live with decisions, how to accept uncertainty without letting it paralyze you. The idea scared her more than any firefight ever had. She didn't sign. She didn't decline. She folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. That night sleep came in fits. The dream was different this time. She stood on the rooftop in Mosul again, rifle steady, wind calm. The window was empty. No engineer, no woman, no child, just darkness. She waited. Nothing happened. When she woke, her heart wasn't racing, just heavy. Morning arrived with gray skies and the threat of rain. She packed her car slowly, taking care with each item. The rifle case went in last. She paused with her hand on the latch, then closed it gently. Before leaving base, she stopped by the range one last time. It was empty. She walked out to the firing line and stood there, hands in her pockets, listening to the wind hum across steel targets in the distance. Without an audience, the place felt honest again. She thought about the young corporal's question. How do you keep going? She still didn't have a clean answer, but she was beginning to understand that the question itself mattered. As she turned to leave, a familiar voice stopped her. Captain Torrance. The general stood near the entrance, coat pulled tight against the wind. I won't pressure you, he said, but I will say this. We don't need more perfect shooters. We need people who understand restraint. She met his gaze. Restraint isn't easy to teach, she said. No, he agreed, but it's easier to learn from someone who paid for it. The words stung, because they were true. He handed her a small velvet box. This was found years ago, he said. After a joint operation, I think it belongs with you. Inside lay a unit pin, worn, scratched, the emblem of a legendary sniper element that no longer officially existed, a unit known for precision, patience, and decisions that never made headlines. Her breath caught. I didn't earn this, she said quietly. You did, he replied, just not the way you expected. She closed the box. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he saluted. Not because of rank, because of respect. On the drive home, rain began to fall steady and unhurried. The road blurred slightly, lights stretching into long lines. Maeve drove carefully, hands steady enough. She thought about what redemption really meant. Not erasing the past, not being forgiven by strangers, but finding a way to live honestly with what you carry. At a red light, she opened the glove compartment and placed the velvet box inside. She didn't feel healed, but she felt aligned. Sometimes, the bravest thing isn't stepping back into the fight. It's deciding how you'll stand afterward. And for the first time in a long while, Maeve Torrance believed she might be ready to decide. Why did the quiet choice feel louder than any order she'd ever received? Maeve didn't answer the general's offer right away. She drove home instead, past the base perimeter, past familiar roads that no longer felt temporary. Rain followed her for miles, tapping lightly against the windshield like a patient reminder. The world looked softened by it, edges blurred, contrasts muted. She welcomed that. Sharpness had ruled her life for too long. Her apartment greeted her with the same stillness she'd left behind days earlier. A narrow space, clean, functional, no photographs on the walls, no trophies, just a place to exist between one decision and the next. She placed the rifle case against the wall and stood there for a long moment, hand resting on the handle. In the past, the rifle had been an extension of certainty. Now it felt like a question. She cooked a simple meal and barely tasted it. Her hands shook less than usual, but enough to remind her that improvement wasn't a cure. She took her medication, set the bottle down, and watched it roll slightly before settling. Nothing ever fully stopped moving. That night she dreamed of training ranges instead of rooftops, young Marines struggling with fundamentals, wind calls gone wrong, breath held too long. In the dream she didn't shout, she adjusted a stance, tapped a shoulder, waited until they found the answer themselves. She woke before dawn, heart calm. That alone felt like progress. The next few days passed quietly. No calls, no emails, just space. She ran in the morning, slower now, paying attention to how her body responded instead of punishing it. She practiced dry firing in her living room, timing the tremor the way Garrett had taught her. She missed more than she hit, but she learned something each time. Patience, she realized, was a skill you could relearn. On the fourth day, she went to the range on her own. No audience, no clipboard, just her and the steel. She set targets at varying distances, not chasing perfection but consistency. Each shot was deliberate, each miss acknowledged without judgment. When frustration rose, she paused. When fatigue crept in, she stopped. That was new. As she packed up, she noticed a man watching from a distance. Older, retired bearing. He waited until she finished before approaching. "Captain Torrance," he said, "didn't think I'd see you here." She searched his face. Recognition came slowly. "Master Sergeant Hale." He nodded, "Heard about the demonstration. News travels fast. Only when it matters." They stood in silence for a moment, the wind filling the gaps. "I lost a kid once," he said suddenly. "Good shooter, bad timing, he never recovered." She didn't respond. She knew where this was going. "You're still here," he continued. "That counts for something." He didn't say thank you. He didn't say sorry. He just gave her a small nod and walked away. The encounter stayed with her longer than she expected. That evening, she opened the velvet box again. The unit pin caught the light, dull but unmistakable. She turned it over in her fingers, feeling the grooves worn down by hands that had carried their own unseen weight. Legendary units were rarely legendary because of kills. They were remembered because of restraint, because of the shots they didn't take. Her phone buzzed as if on cue. "Garrett again. You thinking too much?" "Always." There was a pause before his reply. "Good means you're not numb." She smiled faintly. Later that night, she sat at her desk with the offer letter in front of her. She read it slowly, line by line, letting the words settle without rushing to react. Advisory role, ethics integration, decision-making under uncertainty, psychological resilience. This wasn't about teaching marksmanship. It was about teaching consequences. She thought about the young corporal, his question, his eyes still unscarred by the kinds of decisions that followed you home. If someone had talked to her that way earlier, would it have changed anything? Maybe not. But maybe it would have changed how alone she felt afterward. She picked up a pen. Her hand trembled. She waited for the pause. Signed her name. The next morning, the rain had cleared. The air felt lighter, washed clean. She drove back to base with a different kind of tension in her chest, not dread, but responsibility. The classroom they assigned her was small, plain, whiteboard, folding chairs, no rank insignia on the walls, no slogans. Perfect. The first group arrived quietly, 12 Marines, mixed experience, some eager, some guarded, a few visibly skeptical when they saw her. She didn't introduce herself with her resume. She asked a question instead. "When you line up a shot," she said, "what are you responsible for?" Hands went up, ballistics, wind, target identification, mission success. She nodded at each answer. Then she waited. Eventually, a voice from the back spoke. "What happens after?" She met his eyes. "Yes," she said softly, "that too." The room shifted. Over the weeks that followed, the sessions evolved. She told stories, but never the dramatic ones. She talked about hesitation, about uncertainty, about the nights after missions when doubt was louder than gunfire. She didn't offer absolution. She offered honesty. Some Marines resisted it. Others leaned in. One stayed behind after class, hands jammed into his pockets. "Ma'am," he said, "no one ever talked about this part." She nodded. "I know." As she walked back to her car that evening, Maeve realized something that startled her. She wasn't empty. She was tired, still shaken, still carrying memories that would never soften completely. But she was useful again. Not as a weapon. As a witness. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive as relief. Sometimes it arrives as purpose. And as the sun dipped low over the base, casting long shadows across the pavement, Maeve Torrance understood that redemption wasn't about reclaiming who she used to be. It was about choosing who she would be now, and showing others how to survive the weight of that choice. Why did closure feel less like an ending and more like standing still? Maeve noticed it on an ordinary morning. No ceremony, no announcement, just a moment where her hands didn't shake when she poured coffee. The liquid streamed cleanly into the mug, unbroken, the surface settling without a ripple. She stood there longer than necessary, watching steam rise, waiting for the familiar tremor to return. It didn't. Not immediately. She didn't celebrate, she didn't trust it. Progress had taught her to be cautious. Still, something in her chest eased just enough to let a deeper breath in. The classroom filled slowly that day. New faces, same guarded posture, same careful distance. She recognized it immediately, the way people protect themselves before they know whether they'll be asked to give something up. She didn't start with slides or doctrine. She started with silence. "Before we talk about what you do," she said quietly, "I want to talk about what stays with you." The room stilled. Some shifted uncomfortably, others leaned forward. She told them about a night that never made it into any report. A rooftop, a window, a choice. She didn't name the city, didn't name the man. She didn't talk about explosions or casualties. She talked about what it felt like to carry a decision that had no clean outcome. "When people say you did the right thing," she said, "sometimes they mean I'm glad I didn't have to decide." No one laughed. Good. She watched the room carefully, not to judge, to understand, to see who was listening and who was pretending to. After class, one Marine stayed behind. A woman this time, younger than Maeve had been on her first deployment. Smart eyes, tight shoulders. "Ma'am," she said, "how do you know when restraint is strength and not fear?" The question landed gently, but it stayed. Maeve didn't answer right away. "You don't always know," she said finally. "You choose anyway, then you live honestly with the result." The Marine nodded slowly. "I'm scared I won't be able to." Maeve met her gaze. "You already are," she said. "That's the part no one tells you." As the weeks turned into months, the work deepened. Not louder, not flashier, just steadier. Maeve learned the rhythm of teaching the way she'd once learned the rhythm of her tremor. There were days she left drained, memories stirred loose and aching. Other days she drove home lighter, buoyed by the quiet knowledge that something had landed where it needed to. She still had bad nights. Some dreams refused to loosen their grip. But they no longer defined her mornings. One afternoon, Garrett visited a session. He stood in the back, arms crossed, watching as she guided a discussion without once raising her voice. When it ended, he waited until the room cleared. "You found your cadence," he said. She smiled faintly. "So did you." They walked together toward the parking lot, the late sun casting long shadows across the pavement. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "The field?" She thought about it. "I miss clarity," she said. "Not violence, not adrenaline, just knowing exactly where I stood." He nodded. "That doesn't last forever," he said. "Anywhere." "I know." They stopped near her car. "You okay?" he asked. She considered the question honestly. "I'm not finished," she said, "but I'm not stuck." That seemed to satisfy him. On the anniversary of Mosul, she took the day off. Not because she had to, because she wanted to. She drove out past the city, past cell towers and strip malls, until the land opened into something quieter. She found a place where the horizon stretched wide and uninterrupted. She brought the rifle. Not to fire. She set it down carefully, laid out the mat and lay beside it looking up at the sky. Clouds drifted slowly, unconcerned with timelines or memory. The world, she realized, was very good at continuing. She thought about the engineer, about the woman, about the child. She let herself feel the weight without trying to assign it meaning. Some things didn't need resolution. They needed acknowledgement. As the sun dipped lower, she packed up and left without firing a single round. It felt right. Back home, she opened the velvet box one last time. The unit pin caught the fading light. She didn't wear it often. Symbols were complicated. But tonight, she pinned it to the inside of her jacket where it rested unseen but present. A reminder, not of who she had been, of what she had learned. At the next training cycle, the general stopped by unexpectedly. He listened, observed, said very little. At the end, he approached her with a familiar seriousness. "You've changed how they talk," he said. She tilted her head. "They talk to each other now," he continued. "About doubt, about hesitation, that's new." She absorbed that. "Good," she said. He smiled slightly. "Your program is being expanded." She felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Responsibility always came with cost. "I'll need your help," he added. She nodded. "Then we'll do it carefully." That night, as she drove home under a sky scattered with stars, Maeve realized something she hadn't allowed herself to consider before. She was no longer waiting for forgiveness. Not from command. Not from history. Not even from herself. She had accepted that some questions never stop asking themselves. You don't silence them. You learn to live alongside them. In her apartment, she set her keys down, hung her jacket, and paused by the mirror. Her reflection looked older than she remembered, softer in places, stronger in others. The shaking was there, faint and familiar. She didn't flinch. She made tea, sat by the window, let the night settle. Somewhere, young Marines were preparing for decisions they couldn't yet imagine. Somewhere, a woman rocked a child to sleep. Somewhere, a city rebuilt itself around scars no one photographed anymore. The world kept moving. So would she. Not as a symbol, not as a legend, but as someone who understood that strength didn't always announce itself with force. Sometimes it arrived quietly, in restraint, in presence, in the willingness to carry what can't be put down. And in that stillness, Maeve Torrance finally understood the truth she'd been circling for years. Dignity doesn't argue. It doesn't demand recognition. It doesn't need permission. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply acts.